On March 23, 2005, American Airlines Flight 201, a Boeing 737-800, was scheduled to fly from Cancun International Airport to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. What began as a routine flight turned into a heart-pounding emergency when the aircraft encountered unexpected mechanical failures that forced the crew into quick decision-making. The departure. Flight 201 took off from Cancun with 150 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The skies were mostly clear, and the initial phase of the flight went smoothly. Passengers were relaxing, many of them returning from vacation, while the crew ensured everything was running smoothly. Captain Richard Monroe and First Officer Emily Davis were experienced pilots who had flown this route many times, and they didn't anticipate any issues. Mechanical malfunction. Approximately 45 minutes into the flight, while the aircraft was cruising at 35,000 feet, an alarm sounded in the cockpit indicating a problem with one of the aircraft's hydraulic systems. The pilots attempted to diagnose the issue but quickly realized that it was affecting their ability to control the landing gear and flaps. The malfunction caused concern, as without proper hydraulic pressure, landing the aircraft safely could become a major challenge. Decision to divert. With the hydraulic system failure posing a significant risk, Captain Monroe decided to divert the flight to San Antonio International Airport, which had better emergency resources than their original destination. The crew informed the passengers of the emergency, instructing them to prepare for an emergency landing. Although nervous, the passengers remained calm, following the instructions of the cabin crew. Approaching San Antonio. As Flight 201 approached San Antonio, the weather worsened, with strong winds and rain complicating the situation further. The pilots had to carefully manage the descent without fully functioning hydraulics, using alternate methods to control the aircraft. The flight attendants were preparing the passengers for impact, while emergency crews on the ground were on high alert. The emergency landing. With the runway in sight, Captain Monroe skillfully brought the aircraft down, despite the reduced control from the hydraulic failure. The landing was rough, with sparks flying from the wheels, but the plane stayed on the runway. Emergency services quickly surrounded the aircraft, ready to assist if needed, but fortunately no injuries were reported. The passengers were shaken but safe, grateful for the crew's expertise in handling the emergency. Aftermath. Once on the ground, passengers and crew disembarked from the aircraft. Investigators arrived to examine the Boeing 737, determining that a failure in the hydraulic system had been the root cause of the emergency. The swift actions of Captain Monroe and First Officer Davis were praised, and their handling of the crisis became a textbook example of professional piloting under pressure. The airline conducted a full review, ensuring that procedures and maintenance would prevent similar issues from occurring in the future. Legacy of Flight 201. The near disaster of American Airlines Flight 201 highlighted the importance of thorough maintenance checks and emergency preparedness. Thanks to the professionalism and composure of the flight crew, a potentially catastrophic situation was averted, and the incident became a case study in aviation safety. On March 23, 2005, American Airlines Flight 201, a Boeing 737-800, was set to fly from Cancun International Airport to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. With 150 passengers on board, many were heading back home after a relaxing vacation on the Mexican beaches, and the crew of 6 was prepared for what seemed to be a routine flight. However, what was meant to be a peaceful journey over the Gulf of Mexico soon turned into a fight for survival, as an unexpected mechanical failure pushed the crew and passengers into an emergency situation they would never forget. Departure into clear skies. Flight 201 took off from Cancun in the early afternoon. The sun was shining brightly, and the Gulf of Mexico sparkled beneath the aircraft as it ascended into clear blue skies. Passengers were excited to return home after their vacations, and the atmosphere on the flight was relaxed. Captain Richard Monroe, a highly experienced pilot with over 15,000 flight hours, and First Officer Emily Davis, who had flown with American Airlines for over a decade, felt confident as they settled into the smooth flight. Inside the cabin, passengers chatted, enjoyed refreshments, and gazed out the windows as the Mexican coastline faded into the distance. The crew prepared for the service, unaware that the tranquility of the flight would soon be shattered. Trouble at 35,000 feet. Around 45 minutes into the flight, as the aircraft cruised at an altitude of 35,000 feet, things took a dramatic turn. A sudden loud alarm sounded in the cockpit, followed by flashing indicators. The pilots quickly realized that one of the plane's hydraulic systems had lost pressure. The hydraulic system is critical for controlling the plane's flaps, landing gear, and brakes, and the sudden loss of pressure posed an immediate threat to the safety of the flight. Captain Monroe attempted to engage backup systems, but the hydraulic issue persisted, affecting their ability to maintain full control of the aircraft. To make matters worse, the weather ahead was deteriorating, with storm clouds brewing over the Gulf, forcing the pilots to navigate an already difficult situation with reduced control. Storm clouds and descent. As the crew assessed the situation, they realized the plane was also losing electrical power, compounding the difficulty of managing the flight. Without communication, navigation systems were compromised. The pilots were flying partially blind as they descended through thickening storm clouds. The Boeing 737 began to pitch and sway as it encountered severe turbulence, making control even more challenging. In the cabin, passengers began to sense that something was wrong. The plane's shaking grew more violent, and the flight attendants, who had noticed the increasing alarm in the cockpit, began to instruct passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Despite the growing tension, the crew remained professional, reassuring the passengers even as the aircraft was buffeted by the approaching storm. The emergency decision to divert. Captain Monroe made the critical decision to divert the flight to San Antonio International Airport, one of the closest airports equipped to handle an emergency of this magnitude. With hydraulic control failing and bad weather ahead, the crew needed to find the safest option as quickly as possible. The crew informed the passengers about the mechanical issues and the need for an emergency landing. While many were visibly frightened, the professionalism of the flight attendants helped maintain calm in the cabin. Passengers braced for the descent, unsure of what would happen next. Below them, the landscape was obscured by dense clouds, leaving everyone on board to trust the pilot's expertise. The descent and landing attempt. As the aircraft approached San Antonio, the weather conditions worsened significantly. Thunderstorms surrounded the plane, lightning lit up the sky, and heavy rain began to pour. The wind buffeted the aircraft, making it harder for the pilots to control their descent. Despite the treacherous conditions and the failing hydraulic system, Captain Monroe and First Officer Davis executed an incredible descent. They deployed the landing gear manually, preparing for a difficult and rough landing. The runway was slick with rain, and emergency vehicles lined up along the tarmac, ready to respond in case of a crash landing. As the Boeing 737 touched down, it skidded violently on the wet runway, sparks flying from the landing gear. Captain Monroe expertly slowed the aircraft despite the loss of control, guiding it to a stop. Emergency crews rushed to the scene but found, incredibly, that no one was injured. The passengers and crew had survived what could have been a catastrophic situation. The aftermath and investigation. After the safe landing, passengers and crew disembarked in relief, shaken but unharmed. The media quickly picked up on the story, and the bravery of Captain Monroe and First Officer Davis was widely praised. Aviation investigators arrived to examine the aircraft and discovered that a hydraulic pump failure was the root cause of the emergency. The incident led to several revisions in maintenance procedures for American Airlines' Boeing 737 fleet to prevent similar occurrences in the future. Captain Monroe and First Officer Davis were both recognized by the airline and aviation authorities for their composure and expert handling of the emergency. The incident became a textbook case of how professionalism and preparedness can avert disaster, even when the odds are stacked against the flight crew. Legacy of American Airlines Flight 201. The near disaster of American Airlines Flight 201 is remembered as a moment of incredible professionalism and aviation skill. Thanks to the quick-thinking actions of Captain Monroe, First Officer Davis, and the dedicated flight crew, a tragedy was averted and all 150 passengers survived what could have been a catastrophic mechanical failure. The story of Flight 201 serves as a reminder of the critical importance of pilot training, system maintenance, and emergency preparedness in aviation. It stands as an example of how, even in the face of multiple system failures, skilled aviators can bring their planes and passengers to safety.